Hello and welcome to you wherever you are in the world. My name's Shannon and today we're talking about autoimmune conditions and an integrative medicine approach to those. So I've helped thousands of patients over the last 15 years with autoimmunity, and I'm sure you're going to find this video very helpful. Now, what are we going to cover in this video? First of all, we're going to talk about the pathophysiology. We need to understand a real good understanding of the foundation of how it came about. Then in the middle, we're going to talk about diet that's going to help, and some herbs and a functional medicine approach to it, including some testing that we can do for further investigation. Okay, with that said, let's get into it. Now, with autoimmunity, there's a problem with the immune system, obviously, where it attacks itself, but the normal immune response from foreign matter is overregulated. Now, there's cells called HLA cells, and there seems to be genetic links, components that are associated with autoimmune conditions, and if we break down specific ones, then we can associate them with specific autoimmune conditions, whether they're in the nerves or whether they're in the tissue or whether they're systemic things. But basically, the body has a foreign substance, and then it triggers with the HLA, the human leukocyte antigens, and there are other cells also which communicate with those, and there's a malfunction and an overstimulation. So then the body cycles around and causes more inflammation, and the body starts attacking itself. So the basic understanding is that overreaction of the immune system, a genetic component, influences that pathway. Now, inflammation is the driver for all the autoimmune conditions, and you're probably watching this thinking, how do I get it down? If I solve this inflammation, I might overcome my autoimmune condition. Now, autoimmune conditions are driven, and the inflammation is driven by the cytokines and the T helper cells. And as I mentioned previously, there's some genetic components in there. But the cytokines are chemical messengers that coordinate the whole immune system. Now, there's a theory that's been around for about 20 years, and this is the T helper cell 1, T helper cell 2 alteration in ratio. Now, if we imagine a seesaw, the T helper 1 cells and 2 cells should be in balance. But the theory with this is that the T helper cell 1 is the driver of autoimmunity. So these are in abundance, and the T helper cell 2 is lower. Now, expanding on that theory, I've read in literature about probiotics being termed as T helper 3 cells, and these are modulating for the 1 and the 2. This is an interesting theory. But just to repeat again, autoimmune traditionally for the last 20 years in immunology is classed as a T helper cell 1 overdriving, which is pushing the autoimmune response. Now, let's talk about the risk factors for autoimmunity. Now, whether you have autoimmunity or whether you're concerned that it's progressing with time into potentially autoimmunity, we need to think about the risk factors and reducing those risk factors. Now, number one is going to be environmental, and particularly I talked about the viruses and bacteria. Now, if you have a susceptibility genetically to it and you're exposed to something like Epstein-Barr virus, there's a lot of literature, and as I discussed about molecular mimicry, this is a key factor. Now, with age, our immune systems are altered. There are more environmental factors in entering our body, and things like Epstein-Barr have been linked to rheumatoid arthritis or even lupus. There's also a lot of research showing about smoking and heavy metals in dental amalgams as contributing to rheumatoid arthritis and other autoimmune conditions. There's also links to environmental oils in certain industries as well. So these chemicals, external environments having an impact on our body, our antioxidants, our glutathione, our oxidative stress, our inflammation, our stress, and exacerbating the autoimmune conditions or even pushing them into an inflammatory state. Onto the topic of diet for autoimmunity. Well, there really are a lot of different diets. The most common one is the autoimmune protocol. You can find a lot on the internet, you can find books written about it, but we can't discard other ones. I mean, the real foundation of it is eating as clean as possible and removing inflammatory foods. Now, grains and dairy, there's quite strong evidence to suggest this is exacerbating inflammatory pathways. Now, if we just look at the general food state these days, why are we eating margarine, refined polyunsaturated oils? Why are we eating heavily processed foods like bread? And if we're to look at the holistic foundation of the diet impacting our health, it's not a good thing. So now in this area we need to touch on vitamin D, because we're talking about dietary intake of vitamin D being a fat soluble vitamin. If we are going to limit the dairy, we catch 22, then we could be limiting vitamin D. But interestingly, fatty acids, I'll put the research below, has been linked to multiple sclerosis. Now also with sleep, we can look at some studies with reduced sleep and night shift, etc., being linked to low vitamin D potentially. So there are a lot of studies which are not tied directly, but we can assume there is some correlation with things like vitamin D, because there's so much research on vitamin D deficiency and larger cohorts of autoimmunity in populations. Stripping it back as much as possible and getting back to a really clean diet. We're going to just basically eat meat and vegetables, very basically, with some slight variations, mainly the grains and mainly the meats and mainly the oils and the inflammatory things. Like, we could talk about nightshades too. But if you look around, you will find the autoimmune diet quite well covered in most areas on the internet. Sex, unfortunately, that plays a factor in autoimmunity, and unfortunately women are suffering a lot more with autoimmunity, around 30% more with autoimmunity, and that's tying in with estrogen receptors and the role in hormones on immune system, because there are estrogen receptors in the immune system, in the fat. It seems that with the decline of estrogen, the chances of autoimmunity increases. Now, there's some studies that show HRT, hormone replacement therapy, showed a significant improvement in symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis. So that's a very interesting thing. Now, we can tie that in with dietary intake of estrogen, the phytoestrogens. Now, xenoestrogens are chemical, things like plastics, normal regular estrogens, and phytoestrogens. Phytoestrogens are protective. There's a little chatter around the internet of them being potentially dangerous and that, but they're completely different from plants, phytoestrogens, and quite protective. Now, as women are aging, the estrogen levels are dropping, but if we bring in extra phytoestrogens, that potentially has a beneficial, actually quite a significant beneficial effect, that plant-based diet. Now, conventional treatments for autoimmunity. Right now, a general GP or endocrinologist specialist, they're quite limited. They're looking at immune suppressants, something like methotrexate or some new classes of drugs which are just suppressing the immune system. Now, we chatted right at the beginning about hyperactivity of the immune system. Suppressing the immune system seems to be the right way, but with integrative medicine, functional medicine, we're looking at it holistically, obviously, but how can we get to the root cause? How can we downregulate that immune system through the natural bodily processes of doing that? How did we even get to that point where our body is overactive and attacking itself? So as I touched on a little bit earlier about the gut, that's quite a large component of that. We're going to address that. But conventional treatments, immune suppressants. Also, they would think about anti-inflammatories, so like non-steroidal anti-inflammatories or even steroids in an acute phase. But then we need to think about those also affecting the gut inflammation and increasing them. Those non-steroidal anti-inflammatories can do that. Now we're going to touch on a traditional naturopathic integrative medicine protocol for treatment. This is the stuff people often say, just get me there. I want to reduce my inflammation. I want to get better. I want to prevent this. What do I do? So we need to imagine a pyramid, and we can break it into 3 bits. We can put the top section where your body's on fire, you've got the inflammation, you need results now. So this is the acute stage. In the middle, we're just dampening down those initial acute treatments. And then the bottom foundation is really the foundation of solid diet, solid prevention, keeping it at bay. So initial, what do we need to do? We need to reduce the inflammation as quickly as possible. Now, there are so many wonderful herbs and nutrients which show a lot of evidence to be able to reduce inflammation, and that's where we're going to start. We can literally throw a lot at it. It will put out the fire. No matter what, the more you add, you're going to reduce. But wonderfully, things like essential fatty acids, EPA from fish oil, turmeric, curcuminoids, they don't just do one thing. They do multiple things, where curcuminoid is protecting the liver, but it's also anti-inflammatory. It's also not exacerbating digestive symptoms, and it's making that better as well. Same with EPA or high dose fish oil. We're getting increased brain function, better cognition. We're impacting positively cardiovascular disease and cholesterol. We're reducing inflammation, and we're altering hormones too. A lot of real benefits from there. Now, just to pull out the keys of the diet, which are a really must do, is limit the red meat to a maximum of 3 meals per week. That's the red meat, not chicken and not fish. Reduce junk food. Eat at least 3 fish meals per week, preferably the oily fish. Eliminate consumption of grains. Limit dairy intake. If you are, then think about those fermented dairies like kefir. Limit simple sugars, and especially those concentrated in dry fruit or processed food. Limit salt intake, and especially things like canned foods. Have fresh vegetable juices or smoothies daily. Cut out coffee, especially if it's affecting your mental health and your anxiety. Now, we'll talk a little bit about exercise. Exercise is really important. Now, commonly patients will say to me, Shannon, I can't exercise. I can't even get out of my wheelchair, or I can't move. It's hard enough to get out of my bed. But our long-term goals is to get moving. Now, exercise shows a lot of positive impact on reducing the autoimmune symptoms and improving the anti-inflammatory effect. But it seems to be because of the branch chain amino acids in the skeletal muscle, and these are the powerhouse of that system. And then this is feeding into the glutamine, which is feeding into the glutathione, which is the antioxidant. Now, glutathione being the most powerful antioxidant that your body makes, I've touched on their antioxidant. Now, antioxidants in general are going to be really low, but that's how exercise is working, and then it's feeding back more and more. So if we can increase exercise, that will be significantly helpful for the improvement of autoimmunity. The glutathione really has so many impacts in the body, but thinking about decreased levels is also impacting decreased sufficiency of immune system. And then we're caught in that snowball effect of worsening of autoimmune conditions through the reduction of the glutathione. Now, there's interestingly one study where elite athletes took some glutamine after the race, and it showed that it drastically reduced the immunosuppression effects of the stress of the sport. So glutamine reducing the immunosuppression effects, which is a benefit for maintaining that constant, regular function of the immune system. Stress, I'll circle back around to stress. It's really important to keep stress levels low. There's strong correlation with increased physiological stress to have a pro-inflammatory effect, and there's an increase in cytokines. There's quite a lot of studies. I'll put them in the show notes of this video. Now, herbal botanicals called adaptogens are excellent for managing these stress responses in patients. Now, there are so many to list, but Siberian ginseng, withania is a good one, ashwagandha, schisandra. We can talk about dong quai for women. We can talk about asparagus for women. We can talk about Siberian ginseng. Oh, I could go on, but there are so many, and there are a lot of good stress formulations as well to help manage those stress responses. Specific herbal medicines, Boswellia is one with a lot of evidence showing promising effects of Boswellia in autoimmunity. Now, there's a random controlled placebo trial which was published for Boswellia, and it was showing really promising results in arthritis and rheumatoid arthritis, of course reducing inflammation. Just a little warning note on Boswellia, it does have an impact on the P450 enzymes in the liver, so this reduces the enzyme to be able to detox drugs, so it has an interaction with other drugs, so it makes those more potent. So if you're reducing the detoxification through the liver because of that herbal action, with pharmaceuticals it potentially has a negative effect or toxic effect, so just a little warning there. Now, another one could be devil's claw, interesting name, Harpagophytums proclumens. Now this is gets its name because the root looks like a claw horn thing, but now interestingly that's used as a medicine in Germany, and definitely anti-inflammatory effect, and it's working on the COX and LOX pathways driving inflammation, and it does have a positive effect there of reducing inflammation, and quite strong evidence showing that. I've got a few others. Cat's claw. The good thing about cat's claw is it's immune modulating, so it's used in a lot of chronic conditions, and autoimmune being one chronic condition, over time it's quite good at modulating the immune system, so it has a dual effect. We've got classic turmeric as well. There are a lot of formulas around with concentrated curcuminoids now, and they're standardized, so traditionally turmeric used in cooking and smoothies, etc. Now supplementation has standardized those medicinal effects of the curcuminoids and have a potent effect on autoimmunity. Okay, now let's pull it all together with an example case study of someone who could be suffering from autoimmune conditions. I won't say specifically which autoimmune condition, we'll just put it all together, but there's let's say a component of inflammation. Now, what could be a typical prescription for that patient? One could be a herbal formulation of a liquid herbal concentrated standardized effect of an anti-inflammatory effect, devil's claw, turmeric. It could have Boswellia in there as well, with some potential stress herbs in there like Siberian ginseng and withania. Maybe a little bit of licorice as well, as a steroid and working on the stress responses. Now, other things could be a multivitamin is quite key to fill in, because that person is driving through so much stress and using up a lot. Just some key factors of a multivitamin. It could have a magnesium too, and a fish oil with a high dose EPA as an anti-inflammatory effect. Now there's 4 things there. The herbal 4. Sometimes, how many things are you going to take? But then, as I said, sometimes throwing a lot at it is important too. But they're very basic key for a typical case study with autoimmunity. And there's a lot more we could add there as well, mainly the anti-inflammatories like PEA and some other things I haven't talked about. Now, functional testing, how can functional testing help with shining a spotlight on autoimmunity, and how will it help overcoming it? Well, it's quite key, because you might be wasting your time on digestion, or you might be wasting your time on hormones when another area might be important, like toxicity might be more of an issue for your particular case. Now, if you can do all functional testing, that's fantastic, but some people just can't afford it, so you have to pick specific ones or do them with time. Now, I love heavy metal testing, either urine or hair. Hair is very cost effective. It takes a little bit of an art to read it and understand it because it's with time in your hair. It's not the same as chelating with urine, but looking at your minerals in your body and toxicity too, seeing how much you have, how much potential you have. Now, second one would be microbiome. Microbiome test is looking at the gut flora and looking if you've got any parasites, opportunistic bacteria or yeast. Now, there are bacteria like Citrobacter or Klebsiella, strong correlation with autoimmunity. They're traveling through the tight gap junctions in the bowel, in the microvilli, through into the blood, and then they're depositing into tissue like your joints or your thyroid tissue. Strong correlation. So with the gut, looking in your stool. Now, other things could be hormone testing, blood or saliva, stress hormone testing, sleep panels. There are a few other ones you could do too, but they're quite key. Microbiome, heavy metal test. So I hope that helps you with autoimmunity. I'm sure it will help you a great deal. And I wish you the best with your autoimmune, and stay tuned for upcoming videos too. Thank you very much.